Tom Steyer, welcome to 13 Action News. Thanks for coming on.
John, thank you very much for having me.
So I want to talk a little bit later about your outreach efforts to millennial voters, which I know include the battleground state of Nevada. But let's talk about what's really in your wheelhouse, which is energy, the environment, renewables. There's been a long-standing debate that's been going on in Nevada. As you know, you're from California. It's sunny all the time here. Why haven't we moved faster? The transition from fossil fuels to renewables is something you're very, very interested in. There's been a big debate here about rooftop solar and whether it's being subsidized by other power companies. Is there going to come a time, is it far enough away in the future, near enough away, where that subsidy won't be needed?
Well, let me start by giving you the way that we look at energy development, which is we talk about acting politically to prevent climate disaster and to promote prosperity for every American. So it's really important to us that as we move to clean energy, we do it in a way that promotes jobs and clean air for every single citizen. Second of all, when you talk about when it's equal, right now we have a system where people who are burning fossil fuels are not paying for their pollution. So you talk as if we need to get to a place, we are at a place that's equal and we're subsidizing solar and wind, renewable energy. The fact of the matter is we have been subsidizing fossil fuels for as long as we've been burning them because we have not had the people pay for the pollution who are generating the pollution. So when you look on a per kilowatt hour, wind's probably the cheapest source of energy on a per kilowatt hour in the United States, and solar is going to be cheaper than fossil fuels in the majority of the United States, including Nevada, by next year.
Next year? That fast, really?
Yes. The truth of the matter is when we think about development, you're talking about comparing new plants, new gas plants, new coal plants, new solar energy. But what we really need to do is to make sure from now on we build no more fossil fuel plants. We can't afford it because what we need to do is we need to move expeditiously as fast as possible to clean energy.
The issue with solar, and you did mention both sides of the equations. You want to get a cleaner environment, but you also you want to make sure that it's smart economically, right? The issue with solar and not so much wind, as you mentioned, has been that it's more expensive. Now you're saying that the price has come down relatively dramatically in the last 5 years, decade, but it's still not quite there. You're saying by next year you think it'll be equal?
Oh yeah. In terms, if this is without making people pay for their pollution. Solar is going to be cheaper on a per kilowatt hour than a new fossil fuel plant. So the fact of the matter is we really are there, but if you think about it, we're talking about technology-driven clean energy. And when you're in a technology business, the cost comes down every year. It doesn't go down and then level off. The cost of microchips has been going down for decades. The same thing is going on with solar energy. It's going to keep going down. And so we're going to get to a point where no one's even going to ask this question again. Because the truth of the matter is, it's going to be really obvious that the cheapest way to go is renewables. The question is, when are we going to start charging people for pollution so that we absolutely move? That's the way to get the change to be as fast as possible. Last year, of the new electricity generation in the United States, about 2/3 of it was renewables.
Are you saying I asked an anachronistic question? Is that what you're saying, sir?
No, what I said was it was a great opportunity for you to learn.
That's beautiful. So let's talk about this. And I guess what I'm wondering, and maybe you can explain this, because as you know, there's been a certain commitment here in Nevada on solar energy. Solar City was active here. Then there was controversy over rooftop solar. Tesla is building this huge gigafactory, as you know, in northern Nevada, where maybe the future of cars is going to be determined. But those companies are both in trouble, Solar City and Tesla. They merged. There's cousins, Elon Musk and Lyndon Rive. They're both losing a ton of money. Let's talk, and listen, you're the former hedge fund guy. Explain the economics of this to me.
Well, in both of those businesses, they have gigantic capitalizations, and they have not been making money on a current basis. And what both of them are saying is, we need to get up to a certain size so that when we get to a certain size, all of a sudden, our costs are going to be amortized across a bigger number of units, and then we're going to go to making a lot of money. That is a well-known technology model that people have used in Silicon Valley for decades. So they're saying we need to get to that place where our costs continue to come down, where we can now, as a result, see positive cash flow on every unit that we sell, and then we're going to be gushing cash. That's the argument that they're making. That's why they're saying That's why the market believes them to have very large multi-billion-dollar valuations for both companies, but they need to get there.
You understand this market, you understand the technology as well. Does it make sense? Can this work for them? Because especially in Nevada, where we're now investing a lot in this, it's important.
Of course it's important. Look, the fact of the matter is, if we included all the cost of fossil fuels, these guys would be dominating the market faster than, they'd be growing much faster than they already are. When you think about technology adoption on a consumer basis, it happens when you get to a better technology at a cheaper price. Consumers move en masse. So that, for instance, they asked one of the leading consulting companies to project in 1988 how many cell phones there would be in the United States in 2000, so 12 years out. And they did a model and said there would be 3 million cell phones. It's going to be very good growth, 3 million cell phones. 300 million cell phones is how many cell phones there were in 2000. Right. So when consumers can see a dominant new technology and make a choice, they move incredibly rapidly when the new technology is disruptive and dominant.
It's frustrating for you, I can tell, even in just a few minutes we've been talking, that these oil companies and other fossil fuel producers, and you might not like this word, but I'll use it anyhow because I know you'll correct me, are not penalized more for what they're doing to the climate, right?
Well, it's funny because nobody got into the energy business to ruin our planet. People got into the business because they were providing a basic service. They were going into the largest industry in the world. And they were going to, in effect, this is a basic private sector function that they were going to be part of. The question is, what do you do when the information changes? What do you do when you're working at a tobacco company and then research comes out that says that your product has horrible side effects, gives people cancer? That's really where we are.
Don't you go into denial? Isn't that what the tobacco companies did? Am I right?
That is what they did, but that doesn't mean that's what you have to do. I mean, my point is these big companies have incredible knowledge. They've got incredible assets, including human assets. And they can look and say, let's look the facts in the face and figure out how to be part of the solution, not part of the problem. And so I've always felt like that's where we want to go. When we talk about promoting prosperity, America's a capitalist country. The government sets up a framework for private sector companies to compete in, to innovate in, to solve problems for society in. But private sector companies have to accept that challenge.
What else the government has done is set up what are known as regulated monopolies, which is what we have in this state with the utility, as you know, owned by Warren Buffett now. There is on the ballot this year in Nevada, you're probably aware of this, a deregulation initiative. It has to pass twice. Are the days of regulated monopolies coming to an end? Should they come to an end? You're from California. Deregulation wasn't exactly a dreamy outcome there, right? So what do you think about deregulation of an energy market like Nevada's?
So let's define what deregulation means. And let's start with a very simple idea, which is when it comes to regulating markets, particularly monopolies, God is in the details. You can do it wrong and get terrible outcomes. You can do it right and have it work. The thesis behind an electric utility monopoly is that you should not build more than one line to a house. And therefore, there is a natural monopoly for distribution. What's turned out is there's also, in a lot of states, people give a monopoly on generation. The big plants that make the electricity, they have a monopoly on making the electricity as well as bringing it to the house. Now, that monopoly is not owned by those companies. That monopoly is owned by the citizens of Nevada, and they grant it to those companies with a public utility commission to watch over the rights of the citizens to make sure that that company acts in the interest of the citizens. Because a monopoly doesn't have the kind of competition that controls most private sector actors. If you are building houses and you're charging too much, other people will build houses for less and you'll lose all your business. But with a monopoly, there's no competition. So when we think about a regulated monopoly and so-called deregulation, what they're really talking about, I think, is the deregulation of generation. that not all of the electricity generated has to be done by the local public
That
utilities.
makes sense, you're saying.
So as long as it's done correctly and watched over carefully by the Public Utility Commission, then it can work. In California, we set it up in a way so that we could get taken advantage of, and there were some unscrupulous, unlawful, criminal companies that chose to do that, who ultimately went out of business and their CEOs went to jail.
Right.
But somewhere between the deregulation and the Public Utility Commission oversight was failure, and as a result, these people snuck in and took advantage of us. But that doesn't mean deregulation is bad. It just means God is in the details.
And it just means that the regulators still have to be the watchdogs to make sure it works, right?
Absolutely. There is a real task there where they need to be worried constantly about the rights and of Nevada citizens, and caretake those rights and safeguard those rights every single day.
Let's talk a few minutes about politics and about the campaign that's going on. You have announced that you have a big commitment now to try to get millennials out there to vote. You've included Nevada, I think, in this campaign. That's a tough deal, right? I mean, millennials came out for Obama in 08. They came out for Bernie Sanders to some extent this cycle, but there's some talk that maybe they're just not going to be thrilled. Two candidates running that have incredibly high negatives. It's going to be probably the nastiest campaign, maybe already is, in a long time. How do you do it? What are you doing here in Nevada?
Well, our organization is called NextGen Climate. And what we felt our role is to bring up the issue of energy and climate, specifically with people under the age of 35, and to try and engage them on that topic, both to let them know, and 88% of millennials want 100% clean energy by 2050, 88%. So they're there. What we're trying to do in engaging them and basically doing voter-to-voter contact, so it's not TV ads, it's basically organizing people to talk to each other in a traditional American way about a topic that we consider to be critical, so that they have a chance to have whatever information they need, but also to know how important their vote is. Millennials are the biggest age cohort in the voting in the United States, bigger than the baby boomers.
Right.
But traditionally, so far, they have not voted at a high percentage. And the reason that we have this effort to try and get voter-to-voter contact within the millennial population is to say to them, this is an absolutely critical issue. You guys agree with us. Let us share the facts with you that we've spent time amassing about the different candidates so you can make a good decision, because your vote is critical. And it's important that you participate. And that's what we've seen as our role, to facilitate that voter-to-voter conversation that has been part of America since the 1700s, and that is the way Americans make up their minds. That's how we have political conversation. That is the basis for our democracy for over 200 years.
So it's voter contact and education. You're not going to do ads here?
I can't say we will never do an ad, but I can say that the overwhelming bulk of what we're doing is voter-to-voter contact. It's field work. It is setting up tables and talking to people. It's knocking on doors. It's trying to get people to have a more extended conversation with someone who's a peer, because that is how people think about issues in the United States, not with a 15-second TV ad.
Do you think that the delineation is clear between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump? And what are you saying to voters about that?
Well, let me say that what we've asked the candidates to do from the start of this year, so when there were 17 Republicans running for president and 3 Democrats, but also asking people down ballot, people running for Senate or Congress, is to give us their solutions. We're past hearing, we don't really want to hear at this point how strongly you feel about climate. What we want to hear is, what are you going to do about climate? What are the solutions you believe will get us to 50% clean energy by 2030 and 100% clean energy by 2050? And we've asked that of every single candidate. Now that we're down to 1 Republican candidate and 1 Democratic candidate, we've gone and pushed each one of them as much as we can to give us their energy programs. And there is a gigantic divide between the two. On many issues, there's a big divide, but this is the biggest divide we've seen in history between people running for president on energy. Well, simply on climate, I mean, I think Mr. Trump has said famously that it's a hoax perpetrated by the Chinese so they could take over our manufacturing.
So you think he's a denier? I mean, he's essentially a denier,
He
right?
is a denier. It's not essentially, he is a denier. He's also said, you know, he thinks it's important that we go back to using as much coal as possible, that he's going to go back and rejuvenate the coal industry. Mrs. Clinton has talked about, you know, the Democratic Party has a very progressive energy platform that for the Democratic National Convention, and she has a strong commitment to 50% clean energy by 2030 and 100% by 2050. So you're really seeing, and to do it in a way that creates good paying jobs.
But that's not so easy, right? Let's wind up on that, because
Okay.
Unless you're really on the fringe at this point, and I do call it the fringe, and you're a climate change denier, the real issue is not whether the climate is changing, it's how you deal with it. And as you
Yes.
pointed out, the solutions that candidates might have. That's not as simple a proposition, right, as some might say.
Well, let me say this. The framework that people who are fighting against clean energy like to use is you can have a sustainable environment, or you can have a good economy, but you can't have both. And one of the things we have spent years documenting is that that is a falsehood. That is absolutely untrue. If we are in fact going to move to clean energy, that is a gigantic program to rebuild America. You know, if you think about how many buildings are going to have to be, the wiring is going to have to be reworked. If you think about how many solar arrays are going to have to be built and wind turbines, the fact of the matter is getting to clean energy is a gigantic work program for working Americans. And to me, we inevitably have to do this because we're faced with a climate crisis. What we need to make sure is the second half of what I described as our mission statement, to use it to promote prosperity for every American, to make sure that people in Nevada are getting good paying jobs as we go about this transformation, and to make sure we do it in a way that cleans the air so people don't have asthma. That is, and all of our analysis shows this is a net job creator of millions of jobs. So, and it also will reduce costs by the time we're done. So the fact of the matter is, when we look at this, all that argument about, boy, this is going to be tough on the economy, we think, A, this is good for the economy, and B, not doing it is devastating for the economy. Citibank has said, if we don't move to clean energy by 2100, so that's a long way off, it'll cost us 36% of our economy. That's a ridiculous amount. That is a horrible amount. So it's not a question of whether we're going to do this. It's a question of, are we going to do this in a way that creates good paying jobs for the citizens of Nevada and the rest of the United States?
Final question. Donald Trump, you've mentioned, is so bad on this, but is Hillary Clinton then just okay enough for Tom Steyer? Has she moved on this? I mean, it's one thing to say, okay, let's get 50% by X year. It's another thing to say, okay, I have detailed plans and I'm going to be committed to it.
Well, if you take a look at what she said, she's talked a lot about solar panels, how many she's going to get, 500 million in her first term. She's talking about, I mean, one of the things that her campaign has talked the most about is a gigantic infrastructure project, including a lot on clean energy. She's described the United States, one of her goals, as being to make the United States the clean energy superpower of the world. So how she is able to do that as president is going to be circumscribed by who controls Congress. You know, if you can't get legislature through a Republican-dominated Congress or Republican-dominated Senate, then you're going to have to work through executive action the way President Obama has. So she's talked a lot about where she wants to get to. She's talked about the technologies needed. But in terms of the actual means, the tactics of getting there politically, she can't say because she doesn't know what the tools are going to be she's going to have at her disposal.
All right. Tom Steyer, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you very much for having me.
All right.